Welcome to another episode of Nightmare Road, and boy, do we have a exciting episode today. I am one of your hosts, Decon, and I'm here with a very mysterious.
SOS.
I had to whisper it just to.
Yeah.
Oh man,
Oh, man, I'm telling you, it's been a great weekend. Got a lot done, and now we're diving into murder. So, what better way to end a weekend with murder, right?
yeah, bunch of sick bastards. Anyways,
Right? So, we're going to talk about a case that's somewhat well known, but um I didn't know a lot of what I researched because, I heard about this story and so I looked into some medical aspects of this. You have a lot of information on this case, so we're going to dive into it. And we're dealing with Chris Benoit tonight, and I think it's a great story. I mean, it's a terrible story, but it's a great story from the aspect of there was a lot of things going on here, so it wasn't just one issue that caused him to go off the deep end.
yeah,
So
I mean, it's something that even to this day, I mean, CTE is glossed over. Um, because well for a lot of reasons. I mean, one of the main reasons is that if you were to start looking at really looking down at concussions and kind of, like, let's analyze this, it would actually put the whole NFL out of business because what people need to understand is that when you think of a violent sport, people think, oh, it's boxing, it's mixed martial arts, it's kickboxing. But then, there's even parents out there that are like, I would never put my kids into boxing because it's too violent. It's like, well, what would you put your kids in? I put them in football, and it's just one of those
yeah,
things where when I tell them that football is a violent sport, they, they don't get it or they don't want to understand. I mean, in professional football, you get people that will lift weights, get bigger, and then, get a lot bigger just so they're able to clash a lot harder with each other. And when you look at next time you watch a football game, watch what's going on. You have a group of guys, and they come in and they all crash helmets together, bang, 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 and their brain jostles around because that helmet protects them from the actual impact, but that brain is still moving forward and it bounces to the back and it just rattles all around. Now, think about how many times they do that throughout a game. I'm not a football fan. I don't watch football. I think it's kind of lame. But it's they do that over 100 times. So
yeah,
anyway, so yeah, so that's why CTE is not taken seriously because it's a big money industry, So
yeah, yeah. Explain what CTE is for people who may not
okay,
know.
so CTE is a condition which it basically what happens is when you take a lot of concussions, so our brain has what looks like almost like cotton candy surrounding inside of the skull to keep it steady so that it's not sloshing around. Well, as you take impacts, as you take hits, a concussion is when your brain slams into your skull and it gets either a bruise or a cut, and then your brain fluid gets mixed with blood, and then you have severity of concussions, whether it's a bruise or whether your brain is actually bleeding. Um, so what happens is you eventually start as your brain rattles around, you very slowly that fibrous material, like if you guys ever hunted and you look at a deer and you start separating the joints and you see that like fatty material around the joints, that's kind of what it is. It's so it's in your brain and that begins to deteriorate with more impacts that you take. And what ends up happening is that it deteriorates to the point where now your brain is no longer stopping. All you can do is just rattle your head this way. And now, if you've taken enough damage, your brain is sloshing and now bouncing inside your skull. So, what ends up happening is your brain develops kind of like it's a, so like scar tissue. So, when you take a lot of hits in the face or whatever, and then you your area gets hard, the skin develops scar tissue. Same thing happens with your brain. What ends up happening is you begin to lose your ability to reason. Your your aggression levels go up. You could, I mean, this is not strictly like this is what happens, but these are a lot of the side effects. You see
Yep.
football players that have been in the game, they started having slurred speech. You know, they're very quick to violence. That's why you have football players, you know, that beat up their wives or their girlfriends, you know, out of nothing immediately. It's just a snap, and they snap out of it, and they're like, whoa, you know. So CTE is a condition that is developed from concussions. So that's what that from brain injury and concussions and all that kind of stuff. And when the experts started testing football players in college, not professional, in college and high school, they say these guys absolutely have, especially in college, like they say these guys absolutely have a mild form of CTE. It's developing because of how many times they've hit their head. In high school, it's minimal, but it's there. I think the odds were it was like 9 out of 10 football players actually had it, started developing it from such a young age. So it's
Yeah, it's not
it's
good.
no, it's not good at all. So for those of you that don't know what CTE is, there you go. There's a
Yeah. So let's get into Chris a little bit here. He was born in Canada in 1967. Um, and from early childhood, he dreamed of being a pro wrestler. I guess he watched a match when he was about 12 years old and was like, that's it. That's what I want to do. And he trained. He didn't let go of that. It's not like a kid who wants to be a fireman or a policeman or a pilot. Soldier. He wanted to be a pro wrestler, and that's all he was going to do. And he never lost focus on that. And he trained constantly, and he learned, and he worked his way up the ranks, and he eventually rose all the way to the top of wrestling world, and he won his first title in 1992, and he went on to earn 22 titles. Um, pro wrestling is one of those. It's funny because my grandmother watched like every pro wrestling bout. She loved it.
yeah,
She'd be sitting in the living room drinking a beer and cussing him out. It was so
yeah,
great. But
yeah, fun
isn't it a
time.
lot? It's pretty choreographed, though, isn't it? I mean, it's
Yes and no. I mean, they from what I've seen is the outcomes are determined, but the way that they go about it, a lot of it is, you know, they're like improvising in the ring. So a guy will come up and
oh,
he pulls them and he's like clothesline and he throws them in there and then he like gets them, you know, and the guy flips and and yeah, so it's choreographed to a point. Like the outcome is determined, you know, what they're gonna say it's determined. But I mean, the in ring action, a lot of it is. That's why they say when a couple of wrestlers have good chemistry, they kind of know where the rhythm is and how they're gonna move around. And when you get a couple wrestlers that don't have good chemistry, it looks sloppy, and you're like, "Ooh, that guy was late on that," or because they can't read each other that well. So yeah, it's kind of choreographed.
okay.
It's
I
real.
mean,
Wrestling is real.
no doubt they're athletic. No doubt. I mean, what they're doing, no doubt. But the choreography always, I kept telling my grandma it's fake. She goes, I don't care. I think she just likes seeing these guys. So it was okay,
Yeah.
whatever. But anyway, in 1997, he began dating Nancy Tofoloni. Tofoloni, I think that's how she's pronounced, Tofoloni. She was also a wrestler. Um, Chris was married at the time. He started his relationship with Nancy, so obviously his marriage fell apart over the affair. Um, I don't think Nancy was married when they started dating, having the affair. So once Chris was divorced, they could get married, and they get married in 2000, and in 2003 they had a little boy. During their early married years, Nancy had filed for a restraining order citing erratic and violent behavior. She later dropped the restraining order, but that's tough. It's tough when you're in that situation. You love your spouse, but if he's violent and then you go back, it's kind of a this loop, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, so anyway, she dropped the restraining order. They reconciled. They stay together. During this time, Chris was using anabolic steroids, which are illegal, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
it's a yeah, they're illegal, and it's against company policy. Wink, wink. Um,
exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. So I looked up some statistics on from the National Institute on Drug Abuse because I wanted to see, we hear about roid rage and we hear about all this stuff, but what do the experts actually say about this? So case reports and small studies indicate that anabolic steroids increase irritability and aggression. Although findings may be confounded by personality traits that are overrepresented in steroid users. So, for example, a lot of people who are using steroids also have antisocial, borderline, histrionic personality disorder. So,
yeah. I mean, in the past, I've known people that they started taking steroids, and when they were lifting, and we were working, doing our grappling and all that kind of stuff, and not wrestling, guys. I wasn't sitting there. Let me tell you something, Mean Gene. Grab the microphone. You got a word, decon. Let me give you a whole sentence. And it wasn't that. It was like actual wrestling and actual martial arts. So people would be like, man, haven't you noticed that ever since so and so started getting bigger, he's been like really aggressive? And I was like, yeah, well, he's always been a douchebag. Only now, like you really see it. I mean, that's what it is.
right. Yeah. So, and the other thing with people who are constant users of steroids is they tend to also use other drugs recreationally
Yeah.
with them. Okay, so there's that personality trait of I want to, we want to pump you up, that whole SNL skit, but
Bump you
yeah,
up.
yeah, pop you up. And then, but let's do cocktails on the side of other drugs. And we're going to get into that because I think that led to what happened with Chris. So, um, so according to this, also to this case report and studies, um, people who misuse anabolic steroids report more anger than non-users, as well as more fights, verbal aggression, and violence toward their significant others, sometimes called roid rage, and that's what they coined it years and years ago. One study suggests that mood and behavioral effects seen during anabolic androgenic steroid misuse may result from secondary hormonal changes. So you're pumping your body full of stuff that naturally is not there, right? I mean, we all have hormones, but not to that level, right?
Yeah.
So, um, further, the report cites that anabolic steroid users are more likely than non users to report anxiety. And this played a lot into what happened with Chris. Moderate to high doses of the steroids are also associated with mood disorders such as mania, also Chris, hypomania, also Chris, and major depression, also Chris. Like he was textbook and all of this stuff. In one study, manic symptoms were not uniform across individuals, with most showing little psychological change, whereas a few demonstrated prominent effects. But again, Chris wasn't only using the steroids. He started in with a cocktail.
Yeah.
Okay.
In the lifting world, they call that a stacker. Like, what's your stack, bro? And then they tell you like, oh, I'm using this, and it could be a type of steroid, and I'm using this to get my testosterone up, and then I'm using this, and then you know what I do? I just do a little bit of Adderall on top of that just to make sure that I don't go. And then I get really tired,
Uh,
so then what I do is I just snort a little bit of cocaine and it's a stack, you know, it's a
oh, I had
cocktail.
no idea. Oh my god, I had no idea. So I'm like so far removed from all of that I don't know. But so these personality changes are seem to be consistent with what Chris had and with what his wife Nancy was claiming during the restraining order. Like it was textbook. If you look at the restraining order, what she was citing is everything here that this report cites could happen to you, right? But he wasn't the only pro wrestler using steroids. Obviously, they were fairly
Yeah.
common on the wrestling scene. And
Mm,
one look at most of these guys, you can tell. You
yeah.
know,
You could definitely tell. I mean, I don't know if it's gonna mention further ahead his best friend, who was Eddie Guerrero, and that guy, you see him and Chris Benoit, they were both very lightweight wrestlers, and then you see like as they go on, they start putting on a lot of muscle and they start getting the acne all over the back because of all the extra hormones and he starts saying like,
yep,
the hell's going on with Chris Benoit? And Eddie
yeah. It's
Guerrero.
at this time, the dangers of steroid use was front and center. Like everybody in the wrestling, everybody in football, everybody knew about this. This was not, um, everybody knew the dangers, but they chose, like you said, to look the other way because chasing the next title or chasing the next championship or chasing the next win and the money and the fame and everything that comes with that is more important. And I think, especially when you're young, you feel invincible. You feel like you can handle anything, and you can't. Um, so it's sad. It's really sad. So, like I said, Chris was considered the finest wrestler of all time, and he was impossibly hard on himself, and that I didn't know. So when I was reading this, I thought, wow, that's kind of interesting, and it leads into what happens to his personality later. Um, he was really, really hard on himself if he made any kind of mistake in the ring. Um, there was an article written by Michael Dickinson on WrestlingInc.com who wrote on his, I guess he has a podcast, and he said, um, I guess there's another wrestler called, and I'm not familiar, you might know Chris Jericho.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess he has the podcast called Talk is Jericho.
Yeah, Talk is
And
Jericho.
okay, thanks. I didn't know, and I hadn't listened to it. So he told a bizarre story about working with Chris in New Japan Pro Wrestling.
Yeah.
Was that over in Japan?
Yeah, well, Japan has a huge wrestling market. I mean, if you wanted to
Okay.
make money, a lot of wrestlers from the United States would actually fly out to Japan. The Japanese didn't care. They said, "We get you over here. We'll pay you all this money. Just come out." And in Japan, the culture for wrestling is so strong that, here we laugh like, "Oh, wrestling is fake." In Japan, they can kill you over that. Like the Yakuza is really heavily involved in wrestling. The wrestlers are, if you're screwing up a spot and you made something look fake, they'll actually do what they call shoot and not work. So they'll actually try to really beat you up in the ring. It's a whole culture,
Oh.
in Japan.
So during a tag match, Jericho slightly botched a spin kick with Chris selling a move that had barely touched him. So the spot would have happened so fast that barely anybody would have noticed it, but it weighed really heavy on Chris. And he talks about finding Chris backstage after the match. Like, well, they couldn't find him anywhere. They're looking everywhere for Chris. They can't find him. They find him in the boiler room doing squats to punish himself for the slip up in the ring. So that's anxiety, right? So
Yep.
that's that you can't let it go, and that anxiety now is feeding Chris. And so that's not good because his wife definitely would see this behavior too. And so, Chris Jericho said, what are you doing? And Chris replied, I never should have bumped off like that. I was so unprofessional of me, and it was such a bad rookie mistake. I had to do some squats. He did 500 squats to purge himself from making the mistake. That's not normal behavior. You might
No.
beat yourself but you talk it out with somebody, or you lose sleep for 2 days, and then life goes on, you know.
Yeah, and there's rumors. So he used to do a move from the top rope where he used to jump off of the top rope and like they call it the flying headbutt, and he used to like land on your shoulder with his head, and just bam. And then he used to, and he did that. And this is the rumor. Like, I don't know how true this is, but they say that he one time tried to do a jump flying elbow or something and screwed up, and he slipped a little bit on the rope, and he just went forward and he landed on his head on the opponent. And then he was felt so bad about himself that he hated himself so much that he decided, I screwed up. This really hurt because it hurt his head. This really hurt. Now I'm going to do this for the rest of my career to remember that day
Oh,
so I never forget. And
well, there's more.
yeah, and he used to do this move probably maybe over 1,000 times a year, landing on his head, boom, colliding with his shoulder. He said his head he stopped getting headaches. He did it so much.
That's like not good. So at this time, Nancy is suspecting Chris is having another affair. So, okay, can I just say, if you're having an affair with a guy and then you end up marrying him, what makes you think he's not going to have another affair?
Yeah, that
You know what I'm
reminds me
saying?
of. Yeah, that's so. There's a book out there by Machiavelli. It's called Prince, and on there is he's talking to a young prince on how to take over a kingdom, and in that he says, if you ever conquer a kingdom by the betrayal from somebody in that kingdom, the first thing you have to do is publicly execute him for being a traitor. For if he betrayed his own countrymen, what makes you think he will not betray you?
Yeah,
So,
exactly. So she's suspecting Chris is having an affair with one of the divas of the pro wrestling world, just months before this tragic end of the story, right? So there was a gossip that the diva was named Victoria, but I read it was an interview with her where she's like, absolutely not. She goes, I'll even take a polygraph. I swear to God, we're not having an affair. And so, I don't know why Nancy's suspecting that, but again, she used to be on the circuit. Now she's not. She's at home with her child, and so her mind is probably, you know, who
yeah,
knows?
well,
Who
I
knows if
mean,
the story's true?
and in that era, I mean, around that time, Victoria was known to hang out in the locker room with Chris Benoit a lot, and people started suspecting that she was also doing steroids because they watched her body change, so she started getting a
Oh,
little bit muscular. So they were probably shooting
oh,
up together, you know?
yeah. Well, so just months before um, the murder suicide that goes on here, Chris, Nancy, and their friend William Regal, was he a wrestler?
Yeah, yeah, William
Okay,
Regal.
okay. They were in a really bad car wreck, and they were returning from the gym when the wreck happened. I guess William actually was driving the car. They were trying to get home for a pay-per-view event that they all wanted to watch, like on
Yeah,
wrestling. And they were at a stop sign and they were hit. He saw this, you look up in the rearview mirror and this vehicle is speeding so fast. He knows they're going to get hit. I guess he's probably screamed, hold on. He got hit so hard at a dead stop that it flipped their car 3 times. So the car landed on its roof. Regal was able to get out of the car. He thought Nancy and Chris were both dead because they were unconscious, and he described like Chris's tongue's hanging out, and he thought they were dead. So he manages to pull them both from the wreck. They come to. Nobody has any injuries. They go back home and they watch the pay-per-view. I'm like, what? These people are insane.
yeah. William
Anyway,
Regal was a wrestler, also a British guy, British, old school. He used to be a bare knuckle boxer back in where he's from, so he was always seen as a tough guy in the didn't look strong and athletic, like muscular, the way that all the other wrestlers were. But people were saying you don't mess with William Regal; he'll knock you out in the locker room.
well, I'll tell you. So during his 22 years of wrestling, there were quite a number of people that described Chris as being toxic. Um, he at one time, and this is one event that happened in an airport. there was an announcer named Justin Roberts and another wrestler named Jamie Noble, and they're walking through an airport, and Chris sees them and tackled them with such force in an airport, unprovoked, right? That the incident left the announcer Roberts unable to walk for several days because of the shock to his spinal cord. That's scary as hell. I've been there. That's scary. So,
Yeah, I mean, there was a reason why they started later giving Chris Benoit a nickname, and that actually stuck. They called him the Rabid Wolverine.
oh,
Yeah.
but then, he does this to Justin, but then Justin says it's really strange because Chris also had this huge empathetic side, and he would call Justin's dad, who had cancer and was going through chemo, every day just to check on him to make and see what he needed. You
Yeah,
know,
he was the nicest guy, but people were talking about how as the years went by before the incident, um, he started becoming more and more unhinged to the point where people wouldn't allow him to walk behind them. People like if he was behind them, people would like step aside and let him go because they're saying this guy's gonna pick you up and drop you on your head for no reason, and then he's gonna cry himself to sleep that night and apologize and you know call so it was getting that bad.
wow. Well, so he also had another nickname that was given to him in 1994. He was also called the Crippler because he broke the
Yep,
back of fellow wrestler what Sabu. Is that how you say it?
Sabu.
Sabu?
Yep.
Yeah. After this, after he broke the back of the wrestler, they found him in a closet, rocking back and forth, terrified um, of the injury that he inflicted on this guy, and he had to be physically carried out of the building and taken to the same hospital that Sabu was just taken to. Um, they said the video of the match was over in 2 minutes and is the most played match in wrestling history. And it deeply affected Chris. Like that I mean, he broke this guy's back. I don't know the outcome of what happened to the other wrestler. Was he
Uh,
able to walk again?
yeah, he recovered slightly. He still wrestled, but it had gotten to the point where I think he started getting addicted to painkillers, and then he would do pot
Oh,
and
well.
painkillers, and then he just slowly, basically, he's still like if you bring up Sabu, he people love him. Like he was such a great wrestler, and he was just a wild man. His dad was the original. His uncle was the original Sheik. Like the days of Hulk Hogan, and
Oh,
like
yeah.
Hulk Hogan knew your American ways. So yeah, that was his uncle. So you just slowly see that guy kind of fade away, as he can no longer.
Well,
He
no,
was
I
he
mean,
was talented, but just couldn't do it anymore.
no, that kind of injury, you don't come back from something like that. You're lucky to walk, you know?
Yep.
Um, so they said that this is some of the stuff I also found out. Like even with the choreographed moves in wrestling, um, all of those moves lead to injury. I mean, how can it not?
Yeah.
They're choreographed, but oh my god, just the brutality of these moves, right? And Chris wasn't any exception to this. He had numerous concussions, like you talked about, during his career. Many wrestlers took unprotected blows to the head from chairs during this time of wrestling.
Yep. From
I
chair
remember,
shots.
yeah. Oh my god. Chris stated that he had more concussions than he could count, and his family blames what happened to him on those injuries. And certainly that's a portion of it, definitely. Um,
Yeah.
After Chris's death, Chris's father wanted his brain, Chris's brain examined because he wasn't convinced that it was just the roid rage. He actually had Chris's brain sent to um, a doctor to examine it who deals with brain injuries and concussions, and the doctor said there was damage on all four lobes of the brain, and although he did have brain damage, or oh, and sorry. He had the brain of an 80-year-old Alzheimer patient, which is mind blowing. He had that much damage.
Yeah. I don't know what's in your notes, but I wonder if it's gonna cover also the death of his best friend.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So, leading up to the end, people familiar with Chris stated that he was becoming increasingly paranoid. He would take different routes to the gym every day. He would take different routes home every day because he believed he was being followed. He would even go so far as to take different cars on different days so he could evade his followers. So here's that paranoia coming in, right? Um, I'm going to let a cat in so she doesn't holler all the way through this. Sorry. Yep.
Maybe I should cut a promo on that cat. Look here, SOS's cat. You think you're coming for my
Oh,
belt?
this cat is so amazing. She's 6 pounds and her voice is so big. All right. So, um, let's see where we were. Okay. So he's doing all of this evasive stuff. He thinks he's being followed. It's at this time frame he enters into a really deep depression when Eddie Guerrero dies. This affected Chris unlike anything, right? So he would lock
Yeah.
himself into the house and he wouldn't speak to his family for months. Like not even Nancy, his parents, nobody. He would lock himself into a different part of the house.
Yeah,
He
there was
began to
sorry, really quick. There was an incident where Eddie Guerrero's widow, she told this story about when Eddie died, that Chris Benoit came to the house, to kind of talk to her, and they're both talking to her, and then all of a sudden, Chris Benoit disappeared. Chris is gone, and then they're like, "Where did he go?" And they thought he was in the car, and then she walks into the bedroom, and he's cuddling up with Eddie Guerrero's pillow, and he's just crying into it, and he's curled up into a ball, just like holding this pillow. And I guess they had to really work to pry him off that pillow.
uh, that's disturbing. I mean, yeah, I mean, I get it, and I've lost my best friend, but still, that's a weird level of disturbing there. So he's doing this, locking himself away for months, and he began to journal to try to get out of the depression. I don't know if he was seeing a counselor or somebody said, "Hey, maybe you should do this." I mean, a lot of people who are in counseling journal. It's a way to kind of help yourself see through that. And he was at this point considering quitting wrestling altogether. And he was actually also thinking about opening a school for wrestling in Eddie's honor. So that's going on. So while he's also depressed and he's being a hermit, he's also, and that's actually healthy to start making plans for the future and get yourself
Yeah,
out of this. And that's healthy. That's actually healthy behavior. But now Nancy wants to leave. She's had enough. So he's finally starting to see his way through it. And she's like, I'm done. And she told him that she wanted to leave him. And she told her sister that she confided in her sister that marriage is over. She wanted out. So I kind of feel, I mean,
you gotta also think about where she was. Like, there's stories where Chris Benoit was doing something and he drops his fork and breaks down crying because he dropped the fork, and it wasn't like a sob, like it was a violent sobbing, violently throwing stuff on the ground and storming off. Like, how much of that can you endure, and how much of that? I
oh,
mean, you
yeah,
gotta
I
be
totally get
terrified.
it. I mean, I totally get it. I totally understand. And I totally get her saying, I'm freaking done. I have been through years of this weird behavior with you. But I kind of feel bad a little bit here for Chris that he's finally doing something healthy and moving forward and trying to make some plans and maybe we should do this and then she's like, "Yeah, I'm done." And so
I'm
it
out of
was
here.
like I was like, "Oh my god. These two
She
did
cut.
everything on the same
She
day."
cuts a promo to divorce him. She's like, for many years, you've held me down, crippler, gravid Wolverine.
Ah. So by June 25th, 2007, Chris had missed a number of events scheduled to take place on the weekend over the weekend prior. WWE requested a welfare check on Chris, and
Yeah, he
upon
missed.
arriving,
I'm sorry, really quick. Let
what?
me just interject here.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
missed a pay-per-view event. He was gonna defend his title, his world championship, and this is a big deal. This is what they've been building up to, and it's a huge pay-per-view event, and he doesn't show up.
Yeah,
And
not like him, right?
yeah,
But but they knew he was also suffering from major depression, and so they're concerned at this point. They're like, this is not like Chris to miss this. It's kind of a big deal. So they asked the police to do a welfare check. Um, when they get to the house, I guess they got in somehow, or maybe it was unlocked, but they found Nancy wrapped in a towel, and she had died from asphyxiation. Their son was also found dead, apparently strangled, and there was a Bible next to both of those bodies. And Chris was found hanging from a lat pull down machine with the Bible laying on the weight machine next to him.
yeah, that Bible belonged to Eddie Guerrero. A lot of people were saying that when Eddie Guerrero was doing steroids and he started getting paranoid and he would have these manic episodes, he would open up this Bible and then just break down, and Chris Benoit was there to comfort him, so he had Eddie's Bible. That's what I believe was happening.
There was apparently 10 empty beer cans and an empty bottle of wine next to Chris as well. So liquid courage, right? So he's trying to, probably get to the point where he could commit what he did. The autopsy revealed that Chris had 10 times the normal level of testosterone in his body. So that clearly indicates he's using steroids right up to the time of his death.
I was gonna say, I wish I had 10 times the amount of testosterone in my
Yeah,
body.
no, you don't. No, you don't. The murder scene showed that he had tied up Nancy, so he bound her. Then he put a towel around her neck and put her on her front, and then put a knee on her back, and then strangled her with the towel. I mean, it's bad.
Yeah, and he was a strong
And
guy. I
then,
mean,
yeah, I mean, how he didn't break her neck? That's crazy. He drugged his son. There were drugs in his son's blood. And when his son was unconscious, then he suffocated him. Poor kid. A search of the family computer showed that someone had researched the quickest way to break someone's neck. And there was also a search of the Bible prophet Elijah and the resurrection of the body. Chris left a handwritten note saying, "I am preparing to leave this earth." So, there were a lot of conspiracy theories out there that I was reading, but they're like conspiracy theories and none of them have been proven. That Chris let someone into his house. Police kind of ruled that out. There was another conspiracy theory that the murder of his son was due to a genetic disorder that his son was born with. Doctors and medical examiners, no,
yeah,
he didn't
that
have.
I've heard that conspiracy, and I heard that
Right.
conspiracy where somebody came into his house and in my silly head, I like to think that because he had a rivalry with the wrestler Triple H for a while, that you know Triple H kicked in the door and the announcer like Triple H is inside Chris Benoit's house. I hope nothing bad happens. Like the conspiracy is so dumb, like that somebody came into his house and it's like no, there was no forced entry. There was he like yeah. I think it's just people not wanting to cope with the fact that a lot of people admire wrestlers as heroes, and I think that what it is that they wanted to find an excuse why they shouldn't see this guy as a monster.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think people idolize anybody famous, right? I mean, there's this weird idolization that goes on, and they're humans. They're human, and
Yeah.
they're fallible and they make bad choices and mistakes just like the rest of us do. And but everything about them so public that it would be hard. The side note here is that Chris was seeing this doctor that was prescribing him with various pain medicine. Since Chris's incident, right? They call it the incident, but since the murder suicide, this doctor's name is Phil Aston, and he was charged with 175 counts of drug charges related to illegal prescriptions and various other drug charges. He ended up pleading guilty. Yeah. And
Yeah, this is like
he's
stop. Sorry, go
no,
ahead.
go ahead.
Okay, so I love listening to old wrestlers talk, and when they're giving interviews, and there was a wrestler called you probably heard of him, Jake the Snake Roberts.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So he tells a story about how there was a doctor back in the day that would appear in your locker room, and he had a big like suitcase, and then he's like, "All right, kid, what do you want? Up, downs? What do you want? Up, downs?" He's like, "What do you mean?" He says, "What do you want?" And he says, "Do you want to go up? Do you want to go down? What do you want?" He says, "Well, you want to work out better?" And he goes, "Yeah." And then he's like, "Well, take as many bottles as you want." And other older wrestlers said that they called him the doctor. That's what he was. He was the doctor, and he would show up. Later, the newer wrestlers kind of said, "Well, the old doctor was a myth," and blah blah blah. But I think they had to say that because they didn't want to have the organization to have a black eye, because here's some guy walking around just giving out prescriptions, you know, left and
Well,
right.
175 federal count. I mean, that's huge. They watched this guy over a number of years to come up with that. That's a lot
Yeah.
of counts. And so he was illegally distributing prescription drugs, and they also got him on a conspiring to distribute prescription drugs. So you got to wonder what role did all of this lethal cocktails of drugs that he was given, because we're not talking Tylenol here. It was all of the cocktails of pain
Some,
pills and
yep, some hard,
yeah,
hard stuff. I mean, stuff that
right.
some wrestlers said that you got to have a buddy with you, because when you would take some of the stuff, your heart would stop. And then these guys are so used to taking these kind of pills that these guys would sit there and basically bring you back to life because they've done it so many times. So he says the doctor's coming through today, and they would empty out a backpack and then just fill it up with pills, and you would go ahead and start doing the pills, and then you drop dead, and here's this guy, and he's hammering on your chest to bring you back, and you got to think of it was the Wild West back then, like before Chris Benoit. I think he was the one that really got the feds involved and to keep an eye on. Back then, it was a Wild
Yeah.
West.
Well, also, he issued all this cocktail to a female patient in 2007, and it killed her. So she overdosed on all of this stuff. So between Chris and this female patient, he was done. He was done.
Yeah.
The attorneys didn't specifically name any patient or link the physician to Chris, but everybody knew Chris was seeing this doctor.
Yeah,
A
everybody knew
federal
who that guy
investigation
was.
found, yeah, he was writing prescriptions without
I
conducting
mean, he was probably the one
exams.
that was responsible for the death of Eddie Guerrero. Eddie Guerrero, I think he died of a heart attack, and he was obviously abusing pills. So,
So his cocktail was what you said: Percocet, OxyContin, Vicodin, and Adderall. Isn't Adderall like an ADHD medicine? Isn't it?
um, it it's hard because I don't know what it's used for, but I know who uses it. People that work out a lot, they sit there, and like I said, in the past I've seen people take the Adderall and they eat it and they wash it down with a coffee or something, and then they get really pumped, and you just see like the veins just pumping, and
Oh,
they start
stimulant.
doing something.
Yeah,
And also writers, journalists, like the guy that wrote Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Not only was he doing cocaine, but he was doing a lot of Adderall just to write. A lot of modern writers. Quentin Tarantino did a lot of Adderall, so it's rampant.
After the murder suicide, Nancy's family sued Aston or Austin and the makers of the drugs that Austin prescribed, which I really have a hard time with, like suing a gun manufacturer for, a death. I have a really hard time with the drugs themselves didn't cause. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
There's,
I,
it's
I mean,
like
it,
suit.
it's a double
Why aren't
standard. I
you
mean, I've
suing
heard
Ford for being for a drunk driver? You know?
That's exactly what I was gonna say. I hear these things where people sue. Who did they sue last? Glock, because a gang member used a gun. He didn't buy it from the company. He bought it off the street. And
Right,
yeah, like how come he didn't? How come they didn't sue? Cadillac because he used it in a drive-by shooting.
right. I just I have a hard time with that. Anyway, they
Politics.
claim that it was the drug cocktail, prescribed testosterone, and anabolic steroids caused Chris to snap. Also, the fact that he had the brain of an 80-year-old Alzheimer patient
Yeah.
probably had a little bit to do with this as well.
Yeah, if you
Um,
know anybody with Alzheimer's, you see them do some ridiculous things. Anything from running into traffic to have
yeah,
very violent outbursts. The only difference
yes,
is that an 80-year-old can't do they can still do damage, but not as
you don't
much
have the
damage as a.
strength.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So before the suit could come to fruition, Austin was found dead of a heart attack. Gotta wonder if he gave himself his own cocktails. Um, let's see, huh?
I said Hillary Clinton.
He was suicided. He was suicided. Um, let's see. The case filing notes said that Aston, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, Austin, I've seen it two ways. Negligence resulted in Chris's mental, physical, emotional, and or behavioral health to deteriorate to the extent that he killed his wife, Nancy, and son Daniel, and shortly thereafter committed suicide. I did not, they were looking for a wrongful death judgment for the full value of the lives of Daniel and Nancy, as well as funeral expenses for and compensatory damages for the fear, shock, and mental and emotional trauma and extreme pain and suffering endured by Nancy and Daniel prior to their deaths. All damages to be determined by a jury trial. I did not see that anywhere where after the doctor's death that they went after his estate, but they could have. I just didn't find it. They also, Nancy's family sued Hustler magazine after her murder because they published nude photos of her after her murder without consent of the family.
Yeah, yeah, that's in
So
bad taste.
they That's really bad taste. I'm sorry. They were awarded $19 million, but then the judge came back and overturned the award, stating there was a $375,000 punitive cap on that kind of suit, and that's what they ended up getting. But the, so it's just such a tragic story because um, you have all of these multiple brain injuries, and then you have illegal drugs. It's just like it was almost like you could see the writing on the wall, and I really wish that Nancy would have gotten out of there earlier.
Yeah, I mean, oh man, it's just it's sad because it's not like the physicians and the company. It's not like the owner of the company was not aware of what's going on. You hear everything, you see everything, and because he brought a lot of money into the company. I mean, this guy was seen as an underdog. That oh man, he was an incredible technical wrestler. I mean, when you watch his moves, like anything from he does German suplexes, which is an actual Greco-Roman wrestling move. He does everything from sambo tosses, like he's spot on. And you're like, man, this guy's worked really hard. And then he worked really hard, and then got popular. And not by he didn't have a look. He looked kind of stupid. I mean, he didn't have a neck, kind of like me. Um, and he, but he tried so hard, and he was short. He was probably, I don't know, probably like maybe a couple inches taller than me, and I'm a short guy. But he was like facing these giant guys, and he just worked his ass off in the ring enough that he won a crowd and eventually got the title. Even though he was, when he was hired, people were like, "Yeah, this guy's not very special. You know, he's just a regular guy." You know, so you see him kind of claw his way to the top, and then you want to keep that cash cow going, so you ignore a lot of the things and you don't care who it hurts. You didn't say, hey, take time off, hey, go get your brain scanned. Instead, you're just like, we expect you here next week. You know, you got a tour to
Yeah.
do. You know,
Yeah.
he was concussed on camera several times, and no one said, hey, take time off. Instead, they're like, all right, well, you're scheduled for next. You know, you're scheduled tomorrow. So
I'm
it's
really
sad. It's a
hoping
sad
that
case.
there's a positive outcome to this story and that maybe they've changed some of their ways, but I don't know. Money is the driver to this stuff, and they
Oh,
allow people to get
absolutely.
hurt.
Not
And
not just that, but when Chris Benoit, when he committed the crime, the World Wrestling Entertainment, they scrubbed his name from everything. They pretended as if he never existed. Be, you know, so
well, I did see that, and I didn't put it in here because I kept reading it, going, how what did they do? So the weekend of the murder, right? The WWE put out a press statement saying that he was ill or something, that Chris was ill and he couldn't make it. And then they had to retract that really fast because the cops, like somebody leaked that it was a murder suicide, like instantly. And so they had to
yeah. Well,
retract that statement.
they had a like a commemorative. We're gonna do the 10 bells of silence for Chris Benoit thing 1 week, and then when they found out what happened and got out, what ended up happening, they immediately took him out of the Hall of Fame because he was like in the Hall of Fame. Took him out of the Hall of Fame. They scrubbed all his matches from the website. They scrubbed his roster. Um, he had like a record on the actual website. They deleted it. They pretended as if he never existed.
It's not helpful in any respect. I mean, it's
What?
just not helpful because it needs to be a learning. This needs to be an opportunity for other wrestlers who are young coming up to see the tragic end of head injuries and cocktails and drug use and everything else. They need this needs to be front and center in like every motivating training film that they have, and say, don't do this.
Yeah. Instead, it really encourages a an environment now where now they're going to be ashamed. Like if they get a concussion, they're like, "Ooh, they got my, they're
Yep.
gonna scrub me from the roster and pretend like I don't exist." You know, so I better hide it. And I better, you know. So it's sad. It sucks.
I like this case. I'm glad that we did it. I thought maybe it was too overdone, but actually I learned a lot. So thanks for bringing it to my attention.
So yeah, a fan requested it, and you know we give the people what they want.
Yeah.
So
Yep. All
all
right.
right. So remember, guys, is that it? We didn't even do a disclaimer, but who cares? This is wrestling. This whole thing could have been fake. Like,
All right.
so signing off. This is Decon,
This SOS.
and remember, guys, to always look both ways, especially if you find yourselves on Nightmare Road.